Hi all, welcome to another Seasons at Home video. In this video I'm going to make some traditional sauerkraut, or to be exact, sauerkraut and sour cabbage heads. So sour cabbage heads is something that we usually use for sarma during the winter time, and I would like to have a couple of cabbages. We don't eat it that much, and since it's just two people, we don't have to have a whole barrel of the sour cabbage heads, but the procedure is the same whether you're fermenting 2 cabbage heads or 20 of them, so it follows the same procedure. Now, I like to follow my grandma's recipe, that is using shredded cabbage to fill in the gaps between the cabbage heads, so that it also creates the sauerkraut at the same time cabbage heads are fermented. It's sort of like a win-win situation. Therefore, the first thing that I do is I chop up the cabbage. Now for this I'm using this pointed cabbage because I like the thinness of its leaves. The leaves are much more thin, and therefore they kind of make a nicer sauerkraut, if you ask me. And I simply cut it as thin as I can. You could use mandolin. So then what I do is I just use salt, and I salt this shredded cabbage. So last year was the first year that I did this according to my grandma's recipe, and that ended up being too salty to eat because I oversalted the cabbage, which means that there wasn't actually really any fermentation. Very, very light fermentation was happening. So in order to prevent this from happening, I used a bit different method than what my grandma told me, and her recipe was put a couple of handfuls of shredded cabbage into the pot and then pour the handful of salt over it. So my handfuls and my grandma handfuls of salt are completely do different things. And unfortunately I ended up oversalting it. So this year I salted the shredded cabbage separately, and then I added it to the pot. The second thing that I need to do is to prepare the cabbage heads for fermentation. And to do this you actually have to take out the cabbage core. Now this is a bit tricky because you need to get it out without actually having the cabbage, because you want the head to be whole.
Me wind and rain, you're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite.
So I usually go around with the knife around the core, and then I quarter the core, and if needed I just cut a bit more, put the knife couple more times so that the quarters can be easily taken out. The most difficult quarter of the core to take out is the first one, then the rest of them go pretty easily.
Don't leave me high and dry. Oh, well, I don't wanna jinx it, baby, and twist myself at the spine. Don't wanna overthink it, baby. Just tweet your body and mine. Baby, you give me ice and fire. You're giving me wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me here high and dry. Jinx it, baby. Let's not get ahead of my
now that I've done this with my first cabbage, I'm also going to do it with the rest of them. If there is some of the core left inside, you can always just go around after you have removed the rest of the core and trim it a bit more. Also, I will keep some nicer leaves on the side because I will use that to cover the shredded cabbage on the top.
Oh,
Okay, so now that my heads are prepared for the fermentation, what I'm going to do first is to check how many of them will fit in my pot. Last year I did 2 of those because I have bought these pots on Amazon, these fermentation jars, and they're awesome, they're beautiful, but they can only fit 2 cabbage heads, maybe 3 if there's one is very small one. And since, like I said, I don't actually need much more than 2 heads of the cabbage, I just opted to go with these 2. I could have bought one more and added the 2 of them into the second pot, but it's really not necessary. What you can also do is, if you have like enough space in the pot, you can quarter a couple of heads of cabbage and then just put it into the spaces between the other cabbage heads so that you minimize the area between the cabbages, because the holes between the cabbages make an issue when the water is sucked out of cabbage, because the water doesn't rise above the surface of the cabbage, so you have to add a little bit of salted water. You will see how I do it later on. So the first thing to do is to just layer the shredded salted cabbage on the bottom so that it makes like a little bed for the cabbage heads. And then you stuff in as much of the salt as you possibly can in the hole that was made after you have removed the core of the cabbage. I am using plain salt that doesn't have any iodine inside. You don't want to use the one that has this, because it can prevent the fermentation from happening. Salt doesn't have to be kosher, but if you want to use kosher salt, okay. But it's much better if the salt is super fine, because then you can really press it into that core hole. And you can also with your hands sort of go over the rest of the head of the cabbage to salt also the outside of the cabbage. You will see that the salt is very quick to pull the liquid out of the cabbage, and you want to leave the cabbage heads a bit outside so that the salt gets wet, because then it won't pour out of your cabbage heads when you are putting them. I have opted to do it like this so that I minimize the amount of spaces between the pot and the cabbage.
You're chilling when the rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me here high and dry. Baby, you give me ice and fire.
Once when my cabbage heads were inside, what I did was just added all of the shredded cabbage. I also shredded this last cabbage head off camera. What you want to do with the shredded cabbage is to press it down as much as you can to remove as much of the air as you can. One thing that I forgot and that I will later add on is the spices. And usually my grandma would put whole peppercorns and the bay leaves. So for each layer of the shredded cabbage, you would add a couple of peppercorns and 1 to 2 bay leaves, depending on the bay leaf size. And when the heads are all covered with the shredded cabbage. Then I will put these leaves that I have left on the side. Now, if you feel like your shredded cabbage isn't salty enough, you can always add a little bit of salt. And then you cover the cabbage with these big cabbage leaves. You can also eat them, they are going to also be fermented and tasty, so no need to throw them up unless they develop a bit of scum on them.
Don't leave me here high and dry. Oh, oh, oh,
And then when you have added the full leaves, you just salt it a bit so that they are salted as well. So my grandma would usually use a linen cloth or like a kitchen cloth and add that to the top of the cabbage so that this picks up the scum, and then you just lift both the cloth and the scum, and your sauerkraut doesn't have that strong smell of fermentation that the sauerkraut can have. It really minimizes the smell, and also the spices that we have put inside make it smell much nicer than if it were just cabbage without the spices. But like I said, I'm going to add the spices a day later. When you put the cabbage inside, you will see that the shredded cabbage will shrink a lot on the first day, and then on the next day, if you can see that it's shrunk below the cabbage heads and that it's not really covering them, you can add some more shredded cabbage. So that's what I did the second day. I just took out some of the cabbage to add in the spices, and I have shredded yet another cabbage and just put it on top and really press it down to minimize the air pockets inside the pot. Just remember to salt the cabbage after you shred it. And on the cloth I'm adding my glass weights and also a glass plate that I like to use to even out the weight and to evenly press all of the cabbage down. One other thing that you have to be mindful of is that after a couple of days you will notice that the liquid from the cabbage will really go up, and then you have to do something that's called burping the cabbage, which is you just press the cabbage with the plate and everything down so that the gases from the fermentation rise up, and then the water level will go down again. After 1.5 to 2 days, I've noticed that my water hasn't really risen above the level of the cabbage. So it should be all the way up to the cloth. The best version is that it's kind of like at the top level of the cloth. And so I made a mixture of 1 pint of water and 1 tablespoon of salt. And then I put that atop and just added my weights again. I have also decided to weigh down a bit more with 1 extra glass plate. And then also I weighted some more with turning the pot's lid the other way around so that it presses all of the 4 of the weights, and cabbage is a bit more compacted. You really want to have the cabbage as compacted as you can. For this, my grandma would usually use bricks. She had a couple of bricks that she boiled, and she would use those in the cabbage. Those bricks, since they were porous, would also contain like lactic acid bacteria that ferment the cabbage. It would sort of be like a starter culture for the fermentation of the cabbage.
kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me.
Now after a few days, unfortunately I didn't film the burping of the cabbage, but after a couple of days you will notice that there will be a scum on the top of the water. So what I do is I remove the weights, I remove the plates. I think at this time I already removed the second plate. I have only left the one. Yeah, you will see that there's like some scum on top of the plates. And now I remove the cloth together with the scum that has risen to the top.
You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me here high and dry.
There is still some scum on the sides of the pot, and for this I will just use the kitchen towel to remove that. I'm also tasting the cabbage to see how the fermentation is going, and I can tell that it still takes a little bit. I think this was after some week or so, maybe even 2 weeks into the fermentation.
Oh, well, I don't wanna jinx it, baby. Can't twist myself at the spine. Don't wanna overthink it, baby. It's just twist your body and mine. Baby, you give me ice and fire. You're giving me wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me here high and dry. Oh, but I don't wanna jinx it, baby. Let's not get ahead of my time. Oh, but I don't wanna miss you, baby. So I stand up and speak just my mind. Oh.
I have washed this to remove the scum and to remove the smell, because you really don't, I mean, I'm doing this in my apartment. I don't want my apartment to smell like sour cabbage. So this is what I'm doing. I'm just pressing the cloth down and making sure again that it's all covered, and it looked to me like I have managed to pull out too much water with the cloth, so I have also added a little bit of the salty water. Maybe I could have even added just plain water at this point, but I wasn't sure if it was salty enough, and I didn't want to risk it that it doesn't ferment and instead it goes bad because of the lack of the salt. I'm using a linen cloth and the pot's lid. The linen cloth is there because I had a couple of wine flies fall into it and I didn't want to do that. The cloth is just there to prevent them. And that's it. I'm going to leave it to ferment until the end, which took about 4 weeks. And after that I just moved the cabbage into the smaller pots and into the fridge. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye bye.